Hi, I'm Claire Cloutman. Thank you for joining today's presentation entitled ISO 45001, What is the New Standard? Today's presenter is Dave Parr, our Head of Technical Services. Let's get started.
Okay, thank you, Claire, and good morning, everyone. As Claire has mentioned, my name is Dave Parr, and I am Head of Technical Services at the British Safety Council. Thank you for taking time out this morning to join this short webinar forum, during which I will be outlining the current situation regarding the development of a new international standard for safety management systems, namely ISO 45001. As Claire has said, please feel free to submit questions or comments during the session, which we may have time to respond to at the end, or we'll definitely get back to you as soon as possible. Okay, in particular this morning, I would like to look at with you why there is a need for this new standard, how it is being developed, what will be included within the new standard, some areas of difference from the current OHSAS 18001 standard, and the anticipated timescales for the launch of ISO 45001. So, in the first instance, why is it considered necessary to develop an international framework for safety management systems? The new standard will be a natural progression in the spirit of continual improvement from the current OHSAS 18001 model, and is perhaps indicative of a trend toward integrated management, or at least to provide a standardized framework for management models to follow. Perhaps at this juncture it is worth refreshing ourselves on how the OHSAS 18001 standard evolved. During the mid-1990s, there was a growing demand from all business sectors for a standardized model for safety management systems which could be generically adopted and implemented within any industry sector, regardless of size or nature of business. In 1999, OHSAS 18001 was finalized and launched, led by British Standards Institute, BSI, and has proved an increasingly popular standard throughout the following years. In 2007, the standard itself was revised into its current format to reflect the changes in both legislation and safety management technique, and was adopted as a British standard into its current guise as BS OHSAS 18001 2007. Currently, it is estimated that there are in excess of 90,000 18001 certificates that have been issued within over 120 countries in some 40 different various guises, as the standard has become more and more recognised and increasingly accepted as a guarantee of safety management effectiveness. Increasingly then, it has become more and more apparent that there is a need, if not a demand, to harmonise these various interpretations of 18001 into an internationally recognised framework for safety management systems. Furthermore, as more and more organisations move towards integrated safety, environmental and quality management systems, or at least have a standard approach to managing these disciplines, then it makes sense that a consistent model is developed. This process should ensure a globalised approach to improving health and safety standards and enable local in-country regulatory compliance to be maintained. In October 2013, after much lobbying from various groups and stakeholders, BSI led the establishment of a development committee known as PC283, who have the remit of developing a new ISO standard for safety management systems. BSI currently acts as the secretariat for the committee and the project itself, and their HS1 committee, which contains representatives from health and safety professional bodies, including the British Safety Council, trade unions, sector groups and individual stakeholders, act as the UK forum for consultation and communication as ISO 45001 progresses. PC283, the working group that is developing the standard, is comprised of 83 delegates who represent over 50 countries' interests and aims to form a collaborative and consensus-based approach You notice I said that without any trace of irony, towards the development of the ISO standard. As you may imagine, with so many varied interests and opinions among over 83 health and safety individuals and groups who are represented, progression of the standard has not been without some difficulties. For example, in early 2014, PC 283 held a ballot on whether the text terminology used within the development of the ISO standard should refer to occupational health and safety or occupational safety and health. I kid you not. If you are interested, the outcome was that the text will refer to occupational safety and health. As previously mentioned, one of the main drivers for the development of ISO 45001 has been the desire or need to harmonise standards and approach across the various management disciplines. To support this, a management system standard, MSS, has been established and is known as Annex SL. Annex SL defines a common framework from which all ISO standards should be developed. The new environmental standard, for instance, ISO 14001, I say new, revised environmental standard, and the ISO 9000 quality standard both follow the Annex SL framework, and therefore 45001 will use Annex SL as a primary component in establishing the main framework clauses of the new standard. The new standard itself, and following Annex SL, will include relatively new concepts, certainly as opposed to 18001, within the standard of context of the organisation, leadership, and information and data management. So looking a little bit more closely at Annex SL, the 10 main component elements which will form the management system framework and will be adopted into ISO 45001 are shown on the screen now. So we have scope, normative references and terms and definitions, which are introductory clauses to the standard really. The new concepts, new as we say, as opposed to 18001, content of context of the organisation, leadership and planning, which we'll look at these three in a little bit more detail in a few moments. Support in terms of provision of resources, training, supervision, etc. Operation in terms of control systems, performance evaluation and continual improvement. These will be the 10 main clauses from which ISO 45001 will be developed. Let's look a little bit more closely at one of these clauses then, context of the organisation. Organisations will be expected to demonstrate that they have considered the internal and external factors which are relevant to its operational activities and which have the potential to influence the effectiveness of the safety management system. This is directly related, and is intended to be so, to look at your arrangements for organisation and operational risk profiling and the subsequent risk management controls arising from this. It is essential these days that organisations have the ability to identify, control and, more importantly, reduce their operational and organisational risks. Some external factors that may need to be considered would include political, legal and economic factors, all of which have the ability to influence organisational direction, planning and resources. Another primary theme and a new explicit clause within ISO 45001 will be that of leadership. Although demonstration of leadership is currently implied within 18001 on the clauses, within the clauses on management review, appointments of a director responsible for health and safety, etc., this will now be an explicit requirement within ISO 45001. Organisations will, quite rightly in my view, be expected to tangibly demonstrate leadership in health and safety matters from the very top level. This could and should include ensuring that health and safety is an integral part of the overall strategic business planning. It will require top or senior management to be aware and tangibly, demonstrably involved with health and safety issues and the effective implementation of the safety management system. It will require senior management involvement in health and safety performance monitoring, in ensuring adequate resources are provided for the effective implementation of the safety management system, and just as importantly, supporting all levels of management in the leadership of health and safety throughout the organisation. Within Annex SL, there is a definition of top management, which is the person or group of persons who direct or control an organisation at the highest level. This is similar to the definition, interestingly enough, that is contained within the Corporate Manslaughter Act. In terms of your certification audit process, this will mean that your auditor will now definitely need access to, and by access to we mean will require to interview your CEO and or executive board during the audit process. This in itself will probably require retraining for certain auditors who may not be used to interviewing this level of management. To be perfectly honest with you, I would expect this to be happening already with OHSAS 18001 audits, but I do know that is not always the case. Certainly our auditors at British Safety Council are expected to discuss, at the very least, organisational health and safety issues with this level of management. Another clause in ISO 45001 that's perhaps worth a closer look at this stage is planning. Organisations will be expected to demonstrate that health and safety is a component and integral part of their overall business planning and is not a bolt-on area of the business. As we all know, health and safety has the ability to affect all areas of the business, and therefore it is surely logical that management of operational business risks should and must include health and safety control systems. The standard will require demonstration that health and safety objectives have been set at all levels, from corporate, functional and individual levels, that we have developed suitable plans and programs to achieve these targets, that we have identified and evaluated compliance obligations, and by compliance obligations we also mean, as we'll come to a little bit later, we also mean not just legal compliance but also sector best practice and perhaps particular sector standards. That we identify specific risks, and interestingly a new concept, certainly for health and safety in terms of a definition, risks and opportunities. Risks is generally, identification of risk is generally a negative concept, but as we all know, by identifying controls to control and reduce these risks, we are actually introducing new opportunities for business efficiency and improvement. And the standard will also require us to evaluate and review performance and to progress and improve. All of these factors should be familiar from 18001 and will certainly be recognised as component elements of a Plan, Do, Check, Act management model. So in summary then, some of the significant changes within ISO 45001 when compared to 18001 are the greater emphasis on leadership and commitment, which will need to be demonstrable and tangible. So in other words, we're going to need to walk the walk and talk the talk. There needs to be a closer alignment with health and safety to other management disciplines and standards within the organisation, and a focus on health and safety being integrated into the overall business planning. Identification of opportunities as well as threats arising from the risk management system, as we've already discussed. And because of this emphasis on opportunity, continual improvement and integration, the preventive action clause currently within 18001 is likely, in fact, will be dropped. Okay, so moving on to where are we now in terms of development of the standard and when will it be introduced. Last year, sort of mid-year, CD 45001, the committee draft, was released for review and comment. And following this process, PC 283 subsequently did not reach the two-thirds majority that was required to accept CD 45001 as a draft version of the standard. In other words, it was rejected and is currently being redrafted. To give you an indication of the process and the depth of the feedback, the UK feedback on the appendix guidance document was 13 pages in itself. So obviously there's an enormous amount of work going on at the moment to redraft the very first committee draft of the standard. It is expected, imminently was the term that was used when I inquired recently. Inside sources say that could be within the next month or so for further review and consultation. The draft international standard and final draft international standard still are planned for Q3 and Q4 of this year. Realistically, and this is a personal viewpoint, it is likely that these stages will be delayed, which may impact upon the scheduled launch date of October 2016. Upon launch of the new standard, there will of course be a lead-in period, which, if it follows the recently revised ISO 14001 standard introduction, is likely to be 2 to 3 years. In other words, by 2019, you will need to have transferred your 18001 certification to the new ISO standard to maintain the same degree of external recognition. The most recent meeting of PC 283 was held in January this year in Trinidad and Tobago. Nice work if you can get it. And some key definitions were discussed and confirmed. Some of those key definitions that were discussed are up on the screen at the moment, and perhaps one of the ones I would draw your attention to is compliance obligations. There was discussion and review and consensus taken on whether the term compliance obligations should be included within the definition section of 45001. If you recall, and if you're familiar with 18001, you'll know that one of the clauses says legal and other requirements, whereby compliance obligations tends to put, or could be interpreted as implying legal compliance as the accepted standard. As we've already discussed, moving towards best practice as well, we should be looking and should have identified what our relevant legal compliance obligations are, but also what our other sector standards expect. So the move at the minute is for compliance obligations to be actually termed compliance obligations and other requirements. This is the amount of detail that obviously is going into at the minute. So finally, what should we be doing in terms of preparing for ISO 45001 certification? Well, in the first instance, there is no need to panic. If you are an 18001 OHSAS certificated organization and you genuinely have continually improving mature safety management systems, and this is not going to faze you. However, it is essential that you start coherently planning for the transition sooner rather than later. Consult with your certification body during this process for advice and support. Keep abreast of the development of ISO 45001 as by joining forums such as this you obviously are doing. Obtain a copy of Annex SL, which is freely downloadable. This will give you more insight into how the sub-clauses from ISO 45001 will be formulated and will look. Obtain a copy of the final draft when it's made publicly available. And essentially, I can't stress this enough, evaluate your top management level of engagement with health and safety and be realistic about this. You know, are they truly engaged with it? Can they tangibly demonstrate involvement and ownership, and that they drive health and safety within your business? Educate top management and all other levels of management on the ISO 45001 requirements, especially in relation to the last point of ownership. Okay, so that concludes the short summarization of ISO 45001. Thank you so much for listening in. Hopefully this outline will have been of some value to you. Please feel free to contact at any point regarding ISO 45001. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. That was really useful. We're now going to take some questions from our audience. So the first question we've got is from Mike, and he says, will health and safety objectives be expected for all departments or functions, or will overarching health and safety objectives be acceptable? Do you want me to?
Hi, Mike. It's okay. Hi, Mike. Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah. I think it's highly likely that it will be expected at all departments levels, all functional levels, as well as overarching corporate health and safety objectives. Obviously these need to be relevant. It's no good having it's no good making objectives just to fit a standard, and you know, an experienced auditor would pick that out. But yes, to answer your question in one word, sounded a little bit like a politician there with that first answer. I do apologise, but yes, it would be expected.
Thanks, Dave. Next question we've got is from Anna, and she says, do you think that the context of the organisation requirement from Annex SL will allow auditors more scope in identifying inappropriate levels of health and safety, both inadequate and over the top?
Yes, that's a really good observation, Anna. Without sounding too patronising, yes, it will. I think we're all familiar with, certainly as an auditor, it's quite irritating, if that's the right word, to when you're looking at safety management systems when it's quite clearly not been developed in context of the organisation, and that's just as much you know, an indication of poor or ineffective safety management as anything else. So yes, this new clause will require organisations to demonstrate how they've arrived at the contents of their safety management system, and why it's appropriate to the scope and nature and scale of their operational activities.
Thanks, Dave. We've got one more from Salim. He says, am I supposed to be taking the OHSAS 18001 lead auditor course, or do you think I should wait?
That's a really good question. My advice would be to continue with the course, and obviously qualify as a lead auditor. It is highly likely that there will be competency requirements on the auditors for 45001, and I do know that IRCA, the auditors registration body, are looking at a 1.5-day conversion course for auditors once 45001 becomes established and the final content is fully known. My advice at this point stage in time would be to carry on with your 18001 lead auditor studies, and we are recruiting Salim.
Thanks, Dave. That's all the questions we have time for today, so I'm sorry if we haven't been able to answer your question. If you would like an answer or a copy of the slides, please email us. For more information on developments, register your interest on our website. So thank you for your time.